I saw the film, of course, when I was very young, maybe 12 years old. It's a very strong force. I mean, as you're watching the picture, you get a really strong sense of a kind of obsessive nature of revenge, an all-consuming way, the nature of it, and how it can turn a person out for vengeance into pretty much a ruthless, cold-blooded monster who starts taking on the characteristics of the people he's going to take revenge from. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in the film. And it's casting Glenn Ford was really interesting because he played a lot of comedies and even musicals. He was it seemed like he played an ordinary family man, good-natured, loves his wife and kid. And when the tragedy occurs, it's as if he's turned into granite, into stone, and he becomes a machine of vengeance where no stopping him. It looked very plain, the look of the picture. I mean, naturally, a lot of the films that Fritz Lang did after Fury, when he came to America after 1936 with Fury, when you look at them compared to the great silent films he made, there's a major difference. There's a flatness. There's a visually composition. A lot of them are not very rich-looking films, particularly the films he made in the 50s, before he left Hollywood for good. The flatness accentuates that because it doesn't point up. It doesn't indicate any special meaning to body movements, emotions in the characters, very few tracks in to people, this sort of thing, so that it forces you to look at it, objective observer. And all of this is going on inside the frame, and yet I could swear that the film is very expressionistic. It's not. But in my memory, it is. And that adds to this power. I mean, he directs your eye to the movement and the behavior of the characters, the games they play with each other, this idea of fate. You sensed it in the nature of the way that they play out in the picture, particularly this horrible moment where Lee Marvin throws a hot coffee in Gloria Grahame's face. It happens so suddenly, without warning, and it's horrifying. There is a shot of the coffee pot when he looks at it, which is a moment where the audience is saying, no, don't do that, and he does it.
You lying pig!
And when later she throws the hot coffee back in his face, when she gets her revenge, it's very upsetting and horrifying in a different way, as Lee Marvin almost ceremoniously sets the stage for what's going to happen. And when the coffee's thrown in his face, you don't see Gloria Grahame doing it. It comes from off-screen, around the corner. And it's almost like the force of destiny, fate, just coming back around. And in a way, this contrast operates throughout the film. First is something truly shocking and out of the ordinary happens, followed by another very carefully planned horror. It has a real sense of destiny about it, and like a puzzle in which fate is going to play itself out. Characters are going to endure a sort of exorcism of vengeance and emotions, psychological terror. It was almost objectively filmed, so that it was even more scary. It was more terrifying, I think. It was a mystery as to her behavior at times. But what did come across was her appreciation of Ford's character, and in a way has a higher moral ground than the others in the picture. She really does. But this is wounded. This is scarred. This is out of World War II. And I think that's very much Lang's point of view by that point. By that time, he talked about after World War II, horror was more about pain, extraordinary pain, and so you see it in this film.
I'll fix you in your pretty face. Vince, she scolded. She had it coming.
They try to appear loving when they're being calculated, or innocent when they're guilty. They try to appear innocent and they're actually guilty. And that adds to this sense of inevitability. You know, something horrific is going to occur by the end of the picture.
The film's directed by Fritz Lang, and one of the other influences in film noir is, of course, German Expressionism. And the immigration to the United States, you know, whether it's Fred Zinnemann or Fritz Lang or Bertolt Brecht, Thomas Mann was living here, Leon Fuchswanger was living here. There's a whole community of German immigrants, a German immigrant community in Hollywood. And it was a very rich cultural period. So Fritz Lang brings to it a complete, consummate, formalist knowledge of German Expressionist cinema, and cinema seen in a very formal way, a very European way. That's why these decisions to have these two women up at the front of the film kind of assault you with their assertiveness and the power of their individuality and their personality. That's not by accident. That's there intentionally. And that's a formalist approach to scenario and filmmaking. The women are fascinating in The Big Heat.
Mr. Lagana is an excellent life insurance agent.
Women who had experience, particularly in the United States, of being in the workplace and in the defense industries and on the aircraft lines. So when Gloria Grahame says, hey, you'll do, or get it yourself, or Katie, shares his cigarette, takes his drink right at the beginning of the film, it almost seems like Fritz Lang wanted to serve notice that real life in this country right now, women are this way in relationship to men, that there's a new equivalence. And so he sets it in the front of the film so that your orientation is totally different. So within that frame, which is actually a much more interesting frame, you have the story of endemic corruption in a police department and one cop who breaks all boundaries and has an independent value system and will go up into the face of authority, whereas everybody else is, all his other coworkers are in one way or another passively accepting.
You're under suspension.
Well, you better check with Lagana first. He might not approve.
I'll have your badge and gun. Now.
You can have it. Permanently.
One moment. I asked for your gun, too.
That doesn't belong to the department. It's mine.
That kind of a hero always influenced me early on in some of my own earlier work, and it's kind of a standard. Later on in the '80s, people would call these kind of guys existential heroes, but it is the clarity and simplicity of his choices as his wife says to him, as Katie says to him, why don't you go ahead and lead with your chin.
Just keep leading with your chin, and don't you compromise.
That's what I wanted to hear you say.
Don't worry about the safety, don't conform. You have your own internalized, authentic, hard-won morality, and you're going to go ahead and confront the unnamed city's police department with it. There's an interesting sidelight to this, which is that the ethnic stereotyping in the film has Bannion apparently Irish, and the immigrant is the organized crime figure who has this kind of this control over the city. I grew up in Chicago, and the Chicago administration of the police department was also very Irish, but it was this wonderful populist kind of corruption. And it was typically Chicago, where if you were a citizen of the city of Chicago, you had the same inalienable right as any other citizen to bribe an Irish cop. I mean, that was the institutions of the city were notoriously corrupt, and the organized crime component was actually multi-ethnic. That was the experience in Chicago. It's easy to look at the Big Heat today. And we react to, I thought Gloria Grahame was fantastic, and Glenn Ford's fantastic. But it must have been a hell of a shock in 1952 when this picture came out to have women that forward. The kind of events that occur in this film didn't occur in Hollywood movies before film noir. They try to assassinate Glenn Ford. They miss. They blow up his wife. I remember the very first time I saw the Big Heat. What a shocking surprise. Pictures didn't do that. You knew enough to know that those kind of things happen in life, but pictures didn't do that. The kind of grim reality that could happen in existence is now suddenly in mainstream Hollywood cinema, and that's also film noir. It has various other characteristics, chiaroscuro lighting particularly, and very deep focus, seeing things that are going on in the foreground, seeing things that are going on in the background, the influence of Orson Welles and Citizen Kane. So there are characteristics to film noir, but it's way more than just a style of lighting or a visual form. Film noir generally, I believe, proceeds from the experience of the Second World War and the kind of shattering of illusions, of transcendental absolutes, of moral values, particularly in Western culture. In other words, it's the same event that produced existentialism in France, a general awareness that that real reality is hard, tough, has no absolutes, there are no transcendental moral values, that life, in fact, is a struggle, and there is not much meaning other than what you put to it if you're going to live authentically. If you live inauthentically, then you'd accept the status quo, you'd accept the standard values, and you would blindly walk a predetermined path. And many of those themes are apparent in the choices behind the story of the Big Heat. Some of this, I think, precedes the Second World War in terms of confronting death as something to look in the face for what it is. And whether it's Hemingway writing Death in the Afternoon or Keynes saying that the end of every story is death. These are thoughts from the 30s. And again, it's the human experience encountering something like the Great Depression, from whence comes the hard-boiled novel. So the hard-boiled novel and that perspective on fiction and real life on the streets, in a strict definition of noir, in fact, The Big Heat really isn't a noir film. There is a hopelessness to a noir film. The Big Heat's version of noir, or Hollywood's version of noir in a way, is a world in which there is plenitude. It's the sets, like the set design of Lee Marvin's apartment, the set decoration. It's cynicism in an arena of abundance. And America was abundant. In 1950, the American economy was over 50% of the world's GNP. The whole rest of the world barely equaled the power of the American economy. There's characteristics of noir. Its base is in some kind of individual's character in confrontation with other forces. Now, either he is removed from them because he is fully conscious and independent, in which case there's a concomitant kind of a loneliness in the way the outcome usually works out, or he's somebody who fails to live. And so then the perspective of the film is just a slice of life into here's the way reality is. So the film, like Double Indemnity, is saying this is human motivation. This is the way life is. This is the way the world works. Fascinating, a tremendous break. It's beautiful, beautiful work. I mean, it's all inspirational. Fritz Lang is bringing all of this to us. And so it's film noir done by a great master. There's nothing to be better.
Born Austrian, later a naturalized German, and then a refugee from Germany, and subsequently a naturalized American. And it was as a naturalized American that he died in Beverly Hills. He was born in 1890 in Vienna, and he died in Beverly Hills in 1976. So he was just short of his 86th birthday, in fact, at the time of his death. So he had a long life. So his great periods were in Germany until he was forced to flee by the rise of the Nazis, and in America, where despite consistently adverse circumstances and a long string of fights with producers and other people wanting to cut and change his projects, he did succeed in making at least half a dozen cast iron classics, it's fair to say, which many people would consider to be superior, in fact, to his early German masterpieces. Well, he was the son of an architect, and his father's ambitions for him were to become another architect. So he initially started off studying architecture, but his interests were more in matters visual, and so he, at the first opportunity, switched to become a student of painting. And he painted and did drawings and designs and such throughout his life, I think, even towards the end. And he was an adventurous young man in his early 20s. He I don't think he dropped out of college exactly, but the moment he had the opportunity and had amassed a sufficient amount of money to do it, he took himself off around Europe and further afield. He travelled extensively in his early 20s. That is in the 1910s in our chronology. And he went as far as Japan. I think China and Japan was the furthest he went. And that resulted in some Japanese-themed films when he turned to director a bit later on. But he got lots of experience in lots of kind of odd jobs around Europe before he started venturing further afield to India and to other continents, basically. So he was an adventurous young man and a very self-possessed one. And I think, well, it would be fair to say that he was always something of a ladies' man, that he pursued young ladies wherever he went, but was most insistent that this had nothing to do with his work as a director, or even before that his work as a writer, and that his private life, which may have been very colourful and may have been in certain respects somewhat shameful. There are those who knew him who testify to the fact that he was not always a terrifically nice man in real life, but his public face and his face as a director was much less stentorian than, for example, Otto Preminger's public face. Preminger loved playing the jackbooted tyrant and bully in a way that he learned probably from Erich von Stroheim. As Viennese emigres go, Lang seems to have been altogether a more emollient type when the time came. More humble, more ready to acknowledge that he didn't know what he was doing in the United States when he got there. Anyhow, he drifted into the film industry initially through his interest in design and drawing, and found himself being asked to write scripts privately and sold things on spec to the German filmmaker Joe Mai, who was one of the early ones in the 19-teens to make some kind of impact in the German film industry. And he reached the point, after just a few years' work like this, of being able to say to a producer, okay, if you want this script, you're going to have to let me direct it, because he was quite shocked to see what had happened to some of his other scripts, some of his earlier scripts, in the hands of such directors as Joe Mai. So he became a director. Very unusually amongst filmmakers of his generation, almost everything he made has survived in some form, so there are archival restorations of nearly all the very early films now. Anyway, he became quite an interesting and busy figure in the German film industry of the late teens and 1920s, and was involved, for example, in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari at one point. He was asked to direct it before it went to Robert Wiener, and he famously was the one who suggested the framing device of scenes in non-expressionist everyday reality at the beginning and end of the film to sandwich the long expressionist dream of the main part of the film. That was retained in the film as made, although he had nothing directly to do with it during the making of it. He went on to great successes himself in various genres. He seemed to enjoy playing around with genres. And as we know, Metropolis is now available in a longer version than ever before, and the same is true, I think, for Nibelungen, his earlier German mythological epic, for Woman in the Moon, which is his science fiction epic, post-Metropolis, and for his Mabuse films, which are his gangster epics, and Spione, Spies, which is his spy story. A lot of this is rooted in the adventure cinema that he saw and liked when he was traveling as a young man. Saw a lot of stuff in Paris in the 19-teens. But he brought to it, something of his architectural training. These films are very visual in their sense of design and the spaces in which the characters move. And a certain kind of modernity, a certain kind of intellectual curiosity, can we say, in the way he showed characters and situations. But it must be said that none of the German films is particularly close to what we would think of as modern characterization. There's no sense in any of the films, right up to Woman in the Moon, which suggests a psychological intimacy with people as human beings. People are essentially puppets in the German films, and caricatures of good, evil, honesty, dishonesty, fidelity, infidelity, various stereotypes come into play, and the characters tend to embody positions rather than represent rounded human identities. He flees Germany. By his own account, in 1933, the day after Joseph Goebbels asked him to be the head of the German film industry. Goebbels had taken steps with the rise of the National Socialists to ban Lang's film M, which is a film about a child sex murderer, because Lang and his then wife, Thea von Harbow, had put Nazi slogans into the mouths of characters. That was even more true of the follow-up film, The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, his second or third Mabuse film, depending on whether you count the first one as a two-parter, of two parts of one film, or two different films. In any event, his return to Mabuse as a sound film in 1932 made explicit reference to slogans coined and used by the Nazis, putting them in the mouths of deranged criminals. So Goebbels would certainly have a pretty clear idea of where Lang stood politically. Nonetheless, he was invited in 1933 to be a kind of showrunner of the German film industry for the Nazis, an invitation he found it very easy to refuse. By his own account, he fled the country the next day to prevent any kind of reprisal. Now, he was not Jewish, so he didn't face any immediate threat to his existence. He was Catholic, in fact, or came from a Catholic family. But subsequent research has suggested that it wasn't quite as immediate as Lang himself liked to depict. It's believed that he didn't flee the country the next day. In fact, he took his time about it. It was probably weeks or months later that he, in fact, moved to France. But he did decline Goebbels' offer, that's for sure. And he didn't make any more film in Germany until the very end of his filmmaking career, when he did go back to Germany, frustrated by experiences in Hollywood. Having fled Germany, he went initially to France, and he made one film in France, a version of Liliom, the Frank Molnar play, which later became the basis for the musical Carousel. It had already been filmed as a play by Frank Borzage for Fox in Hollywood. So this was the second filming of it in Paris in 1934, I think it was. And from there, he went to America as the storm clouds gathered over Europe, but long before the invasion of Poland and the outbreak of World War II. In Hollywood, he was initially hired by MGM, who couldn't find anything for him to do, and he spent frittered away time, essentially, in Hollywood, working for MGM or on the MGM payroll, but with nothing to show for it. But he did, by his own account, and it seems on the available evidence to be very true, he spent a lot of time acquainting himself with America. American culture, American history. He says he explored Native Americans. He got to know a couple of Native American tribes and spent a bit of time with them. He talked to everybody he met, busboys, taxi drivers, hotel doormen, whoever, traders, shopkeepers, waiters, the works. In order partly to improve his own sense of the language, but also to get to know how Americans thought and felt. And I think it's fair to say that when he began directing in America, his first film was Fury, and the second was You Only Live Once. Both of them very strong and impressive films, making a very remarkable debut in American cinema. He was shifting away from the Germanic emphasis on archetypes and purely visual narratives and imbuing images with a high degree of expressionistic meaning, to an engagement with a Hollywood and an obviously more American tradition of dealing with people as people. And I think it's fair to say that whatever he did in his subsequent years in Hollywood, which stretched up to 1956, the work is all, even if sometimes flirting with the expressionism of film noir, which of course has roots in Germanic expressionism of an earlier decade, but all the work has a real engagement with people as people. He worked in all genres, thrillers, westerns, mysteries, even one Brecht-style musical comedy, kind of comedy, called You and Me. It's actually his third American film. He regarded it as a failure himself and was rather dismissive about it, but I think he is overly self-critical. It is in fact a remarkable film in many ways. Probably doesn't work terribly well as a comedy or as a musical, although it has music by Kurt Weill, but it's a unique phenomenon in American cinema of the 1930s to find a sort of Brechtian Lehrstück type comedy drama with music. So nobody else was attempting this kind of thing in Hollywood cinema of the time, and I think it stands up rather well myself and certainly deserves another look. But he suffered more than his share of projects going into turnaround, or scripts that were rejected, or ideas that were floated and developed and then abandoned for whatever reason. Very often he was confined to B-movie budgets and was rarely allowed access to major talents. Occasionally he was, but more often not. And reached some kind of nadir in 1950, I guess, when he had to make a film called American Guerrilla in the Philippines, which is the film that caused him to comment, "Even a director has to eat." So by those measures, a film like Big Heat, coming a few years later, 1953, and he made it in less than, I think it was 29 shooting days, I believe, was what it took to make, so it was a very tight production. Columbia, it's not really clear at this point whether Columbia thought of it as an A movie or a B movie, but it's only 90 minutes long. It's in black and white. These are the signs of B movie, but Columbia was by far the least prosperous of the major Hollywood companies at this point, and even if they were making A movies, they were not able to finance them and promote them on the scale of rivals like MGM and Paramount and 20th Century Fox. So he hadn't exactly landed in a strong place working for Columbia. When he said that a proper film director, should be at home in any context, whether it's a brothel, which is, he said, comparatively easy for most people, betraying the fact that he was a frequent customer of brothels himself, I suppose, but also in a palace, also in an office. Also, he offered various examples of places where a director should be at home, and he's quite right, I think. A director should indeed be, depending on what kind of director it is and what kind of stories the director is telling, but it is basically correct that in order for a film to be convincing, credible, whether it's realist or non-realist, you have to have confidence that the director knows what he or she is talking about, and that confidence has to be built on some kind of experience of reality that may be reflected in the work. Fritz Lang, I think, did know what he was talking about, and a film like The Big Heat serves to prove how hard he had worked at grasping Americana. I would say that compared with other German, Austrian émigrés, with the exception maybe of Billy Wilder, and maybe Edgar Ulmer, he was remarkably successful, probably the most successful.